Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we're setting aside the rush of the modern world and taking a slow journey through some of the strangest stories history has to offer. So wherever you are, get comfortable, let your shoulders relax. Let the noise of the day begin to fade into the distance. The stories you're about to hear are all true, though many sound almost impossible to believe. You'll hear of meat falling from the sky, a war fought over a wooden bucket, an emperor who ruled a nation that never officially existed, and a mysterious plague that caused people to dance for days without stopping. You'll meet inventors, kings, rebels, dreamers, and ordinary people who found themselves caught in extraordinary events. Some of these stories changed the course of history. Others were nearly forgotten. But all of them reveal a simple truth. The past was often far stranger than fiction. So dim the lights, settle in, and allow your mind to wander through centuries of forgotten mysteries, bizarre disasters, unusual wars, and remarkable lives. Tonight, we're exploring 25 bizarre history stories to fall asleep to. And now, our journey begins. Our first story takes us to a quiet spring day in Kentucky in the year 1876. Imagine stepping outside onto your farm, expecting nothing more unusual than a clear sky and a gentle breeze. Then suddenly, pieces of meat begin falling from above. Not one piece, not two, hundreds of pieces. According to multiple witnesses, chunks of meat drifted down over an area roughly the size of a football field. Some pieces were small, while others were reportedly several inches long. The event became known as the Kentucky Meat Shower. Naturally, people were baffled. Where had the meat come from? Some believed it was a sign from God. Others thought it might be evidence of some strange atmospheric phenomenon. A few brave, or perhaps foolish, individuals even tasted the mysterious substance. Scientists eventually examined samples and proposed a less supernatural explanation. One theory suggested that a flock of vultures had collectively regurgitated partially digested meat while flying overhead, creating the bizarre rain of flesh witnessed below. Whether that explanation is correct remains a matter of debate, but nearly 150 years later, the Kentucky Meat Shower remains one of the strangest events ever recorded in American history, and it serves as a reminder that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Our next story begins in medieval Italy, where rival city-states often competed for power, wealth, and influence. Wars were fought over territory, trade routes, and political alliances. But one conflict became famous for a far stranger reason: a bucket. In the year 1325, tensions between the cities of Bologna and Modena had already been simmering for years. Then, according to tradition, soldiers from Modena raided Bologna and returned home with an unusual prize: a wooden bucket taken from a city well. To modern ears, it sounds almost ridiculous. Surely no one would go to war over a bucket, but the bucket became a symbol of a much deeper rivalry between the two cities. Soon, thousands of soldiers were mobilized. Armies marched. Battles were fought. Lives were lost. And all the while, the stolen bucket remained a source of mockery and pride. Today, the conflict is remembered as the War of the Bucket. The original bucket, or at least one believed to be connected to the story, is still displayed in Modena. It serves as a reminder that history is often stranger than fiction. Because sometimes, behind great battles and political struggles, there is also a wooden bucket quietly waiting to become part of history. Our next story takes us to the city of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518. At first, it seemed like an ordinary day. Merchants opened their shops, workers went about their business, and life continued as it always had. Then something strange happened. According to historical accounts, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no celebration, no obvious reason at all. Yet she continued dancing for hours, then for days. Soon, other people began to join her. What started with a single dancer grew into dozens, then hundreds. Before long, large groups of people were dancing throughout the city. Many appeared unable to stop. Witnesses reported that some dancers continued for days, despite exhaustion, dehydration, and injury. The situation became so alarming that local authorities searched desperately for an explanation. Physicians, religious leaders, and city officials all offered different theories. Some believed it was caused by illness. Others thought it might be divine punishment. No one truly knew. Eventually, the outbreak faded away as mysteriously as it had begun. More than 500 years later, historians still debate what really happened in Strasbourg during that strange summer. Whatever the answer may be, the dancing plague remains one of history's most unusual and enduring mysteries. Our next story begins with one of history's most famous inventors. Nikola Tesla helped pioneer many of the technologies that power the modern world. But late in his life, Tesla made an extraordinary claim. He said he had designed a weapon so powerful that it could destroy aircraft from hundreds of miles away. Newspapers called it the death beam. According to Tesla, the weapon would make nations impossible to invade and could potentially end war forever. The announcement captured headlines around the world. Some people believed Tesla had created a revolutionary breakthrough. Others thought the aging inventor was making impossible promises. Despite years of speculation, no working version of the weapon was ever publicly demonstrated. When Tesla died in 1943, rumors spread that government officials examined his papers, searching for evidence of the mysterious device. To this day, historians continue to debate whether the death beam was a genuine scientific concept, an unfinished project, or simply an ambitious dream. Whatever the truth may be, Tesla's death beam remains one of history's most enduring technological mysteries. Our next story begins in medieval France. Jacques de Molay was the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, one of the most powerful organizations in Europe. For years, the Templars had accumulated wealth, land, and influence. But in 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of Templar members across the kingdom. They were accused of crimes ranging from heresy to corruption. After years of imprisonment and trials, Jacques de Molay was sentenced to death. In 1314, he was brought before a crowd and condemned to be burned at the stake. According to legend, as the flames rose around him, de Molay declared that both King Philip and Pope Clement V would soon answer before God's judgment. What happened next helped create one of history's most famous curses. Within a year, both the Pope and the King were dead. Whether it was coincidence or something more, people across Europe began whispering about the dying Templars' final words. More than 700 years later, the curse of Jacques de Molay remains one of history's most enduring legends. Our next story takes us to 19th century China. A young man named Xiuquan spent years studying for the imperial examinations, hoping to earn a government position. But after repeatedly failing the difficult tests, he suffered a severe emotional breakdown. During this period, Hong experienced a series of vivid visions. At first, he didn't fully understand them. Years later, after reading Christian religious texts, he came to a remarkable conclusion. Hong became convinced that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Most people might have kept such a belief to themselves. Hong did not. Instead, he began preaching his message across China. To the surprise of many, thousands of people listened, then tens of thousands. Eventually, his movement grew into a massive rebellion known as the Taiping Rebellion. For more than a decade, armies fought across China in one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. millions of people lost their lives. Today, Xiuquan remains one of history's most unusual and influential figures, a man whose extraordinary belief helped change the course of a nation. Our next story begins with an emperor who ruled a country that wasn't truly his. In the 1860s, Maximilian of Austria was offered the crown of Mexico. Backed by the French Empire, he accepted and traveled across the Atlantic to begin his new reign. Maximilian believed he could bring stability and prosperity to the country. But the reality was very different. Many Mexicans refused to recognize him as their rightful emperor. As political tensions grew, support from France slowly disappeared. Without the protection of French troops, Maximilian found himself increasingly isolated. Eventually, Republican forces captured the emperor. Although many European leaders pleaded for mercy, the sentence remained unchanged. In 1867, Maximilian was executed by firing squad. His brief reign lasted only a few years. Today, he is remembered as one of history's most unusual monarchs, a European archduke who crossed an ocean to become Emperor of Mexico, only to lose both his throne and his life. Our next story takes us to Australia in the year 1932. After the First World War, many veterans were given farmland in Western Australia. But they soon faced an unexpected problem. Thousands of emus began migrating through the region. The large birds trampled crops, damaged fences, and caused widespread frustration for local farmers. With the situation growing worse, the Australian government made an unusual decision. It sent soldiers armed with machine guns to stop the birds. The operation sounded simple enough. Instead, the emus proved remarkably difficult to catch. They scattered in every direction, outran the soldiers, and quickly disappeared into the countryside. Despite several attempts, very few birds were eliminated. Before long, the military operation was called off. The emus had effectively won. Today, the event is remembered as the Great Emu War. It remains one of history's strangest military campaigns, proving that sometimes nature can be a far more challenging opponent than anyone expects. Our next story begins on the island of Borneo during the 1950s. Health officials were working to eliminate mosquitoes that spread malaria. To do this, they sprayed villages with a powerful insecticide. At first, the plan appeared to work. Mosquito numbers quickly declined. But before long, an unexpected chain of events began. The insecticide also poisoned many insects that local geckos relied upon for food. Cats hunted the weakened geckos and were poisoned as well. As the cat population disappeared, rats multiplied rapidly. The growing rat population threatened food supplies and increased the risk of disease. To solve the new problem, officials came up with an unusual solution. They loaded dozens of cats into aircraft and gently parachuted them into the affected villages. The operation became known as Operation Cat Drop. It remains one of history's most unusual examples of how solving one problem can sometimes create another, and how in this case, the solution quite literally fell from the sky. Our next story takes us to Boston in the year 1919. On a cold January afternoon, a massive steel storage tank stood quietly along the city's waterfront. Inside were more than 2 million gallons of molasses. Without warning, the enormous tank suddenly burst. Witnesses described hearing a deep rumble before a towering wave of molasses rushed through the streets. The thick syrup swept away buildings, wagons, and anything else in its path. Rescuers struggled to move through the sticky flood as they searched for survivors. When the cleanup was finally complete, investigators spent months trying to determine why the tank had failed. Some believed poor construction was to blame. Others pointed to the unusually warm weather that day. Today, the Great Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest industrial disasters in American history. A reminder that even something as ordinary as molasses can become the center of an extraordinary story. Our next story begins during the Second World War. While traveling through the Middle East, a group of Polish soldiers came across an orphaned Syrian brown bear cub. The tiny bear was adopted by the soldiers and given the name Wojtek. As he grew, Wojtek became an unlikely member of the unit. He traveled with the soldiers, shared their meals, and quickly became a beloved companion. According to those who served alongside him, Wojtek enjoyed wrestling with the men and was especially fond of fruit, honey, and even an occasional bottle of beer. When the unit was sent to Italy, military regulations prevented animals from officially joining the transport ships, so the soldiers found an unusual solution. They enlisted Wojtek as a private in the Polish army. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, Wojtek reportedly helped carry heavy crates of artillery shells to the front lines. Whether he fully understood his role or was simply copying the soldiers around him, no one can say. After the war, Wojtek spent the rest of his life in a zoo in Scotland, where many of his former comrades continued to visit him. Today, he remains one of the most remarkable and beloved animals in military history. Our next story takes us to Washington, D.C., during the final days of the American Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln had carried the weight of the nation through 4 difficult years of conflict. But only days before his assassination, he shared a dream that many would later find unsettling. According to those close to him, Lincoln dreamed he was walking through the White House. The halls were strangely quiet. Then he heard the sound of people crying. Following the voices, he entered a room where soldiers stood silently beside a covered body. Lincoln asked who had died. One of the guards answered, "The president." He awoke deeply disturbed by the dream. Only a short time later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated while attending a play at Ford's Theatre. Whether the dream was simply coincidence, a reflection of the enormous pressures he faced, or something more mysterious has been debated ever since. Today, it remains one of history's most famous and haunting premonitions. Our next story takes us to London in the year 1814. Inside a busy brewery stood enormous wooden vats, each holding hundreds of thousands of gallons of beer. For years, they had quietly towered above the workers below. Then, without warning, one of the giant iron hoops surrounding a vat suddenly failed. The enormous container burst apart. Its collapse triggered a chain reaction, causing several neighboring vats to rupture as well. In an instant, a massive wave of beer surged through the brewery and into the surrounding streets. Buildings were damaged as the flood rushed through one of London's poorest neighborhoods. The cleanup took days, and the unusual disaster quickly became famous throughout the city. Investigators later ruled the event an accident. Today, it remains one of the most unusual industrial disasters ever recorded, a reminder that history sometimes takes the most unexpected turns. Our next story takes us to the Austrian Empire in the year 1788. The Austrian army was preparing to face the Ottoman Empire during a military campaign in what is now Romania. One evening, a group of soldiers crossed a nearby river to scout the area. Instead of finding the enemy, they found merchants selling alcohol. After drinking late into the night, an argument broke out among the soldiers. Voices were raised. Then someone reportedly fired a shot. Hearing the commotion in the darkness, other units believed the Ottoman army had launched a surprise attack. Confusion quickly spread through the camp. Orders were shouted in different languages. Panic took hold. Before long, Austrian soldiers were firing at one another in the darkness, each believing they were under attack. By sunrise, the battlefield was filled with abandoned equipment and exhausted troops. The Ottoman army reportedly arrived days later to find the Austrian camp already deserted. Although historians continue to debate exactly how much of the story is true, the Battle of Karansebes remains one of history's most famous examples of military confusion. Sometimes, the greatest enemy is misunderstanding itself. Our next story begins shortly after one of Napoleon Bonaparte's greatest military victories. To celebrate, a grand rabbit hunt was organized for the French emperor. Thousands of rabbits were gathered and released into an open field. The organizers expected the frightened animals to scatter into the countryside. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The rabbits rushed toward Napoleon and his hunting party. Wave after wave of rabbits charged across the field. Some climbed onto the horses, others surrounded the emperor's carriage. The startled hunters tried to chase them away, but the determined animals refused to retreat. The explanation turned out to be surprisingly simple. Many of the rabbits had been raised in captivity. Rather than seeing people as a threat, they associated them with feeding time. Instead of fleeing, they eagerly ran toward the nearest humans. The hunt quickly came to an end, and one of history's greatest military commanders found himself retreating before an army of rabbits. Today, the story remains one of the funniest and most unexpected moments associated with Napoleon Bonaparte. Our next story takes us to the Oregon coast in the year 1970. After a massive whale washed ashore, officials faced an unexpected problem. The animal weighed several tons, and no one was quite sure how to remove it. After considering several ideas, they settled on one that seemed reasonable at the time: explosives. The plan was simple. Use dynamite to break the whale into smaller pieces that scavenging birds could quickly carry away. Crowds gathered along the beach to watch. Then the explosives were detonated. Instead of disappearing, enormous pieces of the whale were launched high into the air. Blubber and debris rained down across the beach, damaging nearby cars and sending spectators running for cover. The cleanup proved far more difficult than anyone had expected. Today, the exploding whale has become one of the most famous and unusual engineering mistakes in American history. A reminder that even the best intentions can sometimes produce unforgettable results. Our next story takes us to the early years of the United States. Long before becoming the nation's 7th president, Andrew Jackson had earned a reputation for defending his honor. During his lifetime, he participated in numerous duels, a practice that was still accepted among many gentlemen of the time. One of the most famous took place in 1806. Jackson faced a skilled marksman named Charles Dickinson after a bitter personal dispute. When the duel began, Dickinson fired first. The bullet struck Jackson in the chest. Remarkably, he remained standing. Ignoring his injury, Jackson calmly raised his pistol, took careful aim, and returned fire. His shot proved fatal. The bullet that struck Jackson was never removed. It remained lodged near his heart for the rest of his life. Years later, despite carrying the wound, Andrew Jackson would become President of the United States. His remarkable resilience helped shape the image of one of America's most determined and controversial leaders. Our next story takes us to Paris at the end of the 19th century. Scientist Marie Curie spent years studying mysterious materials that emitted an invisible form of energy. Working alongside her husband, Pierre, she discovered 2 new elements: polonium and radium. At the time, no one fully understood the dangers of radiation. Marie handled radioactive materials with her bare hands and often carried small, glowing samples in her pockets because she found their soft blue light beautiful. Her discoveries transformed science and eventually earned her 2 Nobel Prizes. But they also came at a terrible cost. Years of exposure to radiation damaged her health, and in 1934, Marie Curie died from a disease linked to that exposure. Even today, more than a century later, many of her notebooks, laboratory journals, and pieces of equipment remain so radioactive that they are stored inside lead-lined containers. Researchers who wish to examine them must wear protective clothing. Even Marie Curie's coffin is lined with lead to safely contain the radiation that still lingers. It is a remarkable reminder that one woman's discoveries forever change science, and that their invisible power can still be measured more than 100 years later. Our next story takes us to the state of Georgia in the year 1969. Several years before becoming President of the United States, Jimmy Carter experienced something he could never fully explain. One evening, while waiting outside a meeting with several other people, Carter noticed a bright object in the sky. According to his account, the object appeared suddenly and glowed with unusual colors. It seemed to hover silently before changing brightness and moving away into the distance. Years later, Carter publicly described what he had seen. He never claimed it was an alien spacecraft. Instead, he simply admitted that he could not explain it. Astronomers have since suggested that the object may have been the planet Venus or an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. Others remain unconvinced. Whatever the explanation, Jimmy Carter's sighting remains one of the most well-known UFO reports ever made by a future president. A quiet mystery that still inspires curiosity more than half a century later. Our next story takes us to Rome in the year 897. It begins with one of the strangest trials in history. Pope Stephen VI ordered the body of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, to be dug up months after his death. The corpse was dressed once again in papal robes and placed on a throne inside a church. An official was appointed to answer questions on behalf of the dead pope as the trial began. Formosus was accused of unlawfully becoming pope and violating church law. The outcome was never really in doubt. He was declared guilty. His papal robes were removed. 3 fingers used for blessings were cut from his hand, and his body was eventually thrown into the Tiber River. The bizarre spectacle shocked many people in Rome. Public anger quickly turned against Pope Stephen VI. Before long, he was removed from power, imprisoned, and later died in captivity. Today, the Cadaver Synod, as it became known, remains one of the most extraordinary and unsettling episodes in the history of the medieval papacy. A reminder that truth can sometimes be stranger than fiction. Our next story takes us to the American frontier, long before Abraham Lincoln became president. As a young man, Lincoln worked on farms, split rails, and spent much of his time performing hard physical labor. He also developed a reputation for being remarkably strong. Neighbors challenged him to wrestling matches, where Lincoln quickly earned the respect of those around him. According to historical accounts, he competed in hundreds of matches and lost only one. His most famous contest came against Jack Armstrong, the leader of a local group known as the Clary's Grove Boys. The match drew a large crowd eager to see whether the tall newcomer could be defeated. After a hard-fought contest, Lincoln emerged victorious. His strength and honesty impressed even his opponents, who soon became his friends. Years later, Lincoln would lead the United States through one of its greatest challenges as president. But long before the White House, he had already earned another title, one of the toughest wrestlers on the American frontier. Our next story takes us to San Francisco during the 1850s. A businessman named Joshua Abraham Norton suffered a financial setback that cost him nearly everything. Soon afterward, he made an extraordinary announcement. He declared himself Emperor of the United States. Most people would have expected the city to laugh. Instead, something unexpected happened. The people of San Francisco embraced the idea. Shopkeepers welcomed him into their stores. Newspapers printed his proclamations. Even local businesses accepted currency issued in his name. Although he held no official power, Emperor Norton became one of the city's most beloved citizens. He issued imaginative decrees, proposed the construction of a bridge connecting San Francisco and Oakland decades before one was eventually built, and spent his days walking the city streets greeting the people. When Emperor Norton died in 1880, thousands of people attended his funeral. Today, he is remembered not for ruling an empire, but for reminding a city that kindness, imagination, and a little humor can leave a lasting legacy. Our next story begins in 1952. By then, Albert Einstein was already one of the most famous scientists in the world. His theories had transformed modern physics, and his name had become synonymous with genius. But after the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, an extraordinary proposal was made. The government of Israel offered the presidency to Albert Einstein. Although the position was largely ceremonial, it was one of the highest honors the nation could bestow. Einstein was deeply moved by the offer. Yet after careful consideration, he politely declined. In a heartfelt letter, he explained that he lacked the natural ability and experience needed to govern people. Instead, he chose to continue his scientific work and quiet life of research. Today, the letter remains a remarkable reminder that even one of history's greatest minds recognized the importance of knowing his own strengths and limitations. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is understanding which path is truly your own. Our next story takes us to the Netherlands during the 1630s. At the time, tulips were a new and exotic flower that had recently arrived from the Ottoman Empire. Their bright colors and unusual patterns quickly made them highly desirable. As demand grew, people began buying and selling tulip bulbs for ever-increasing prices. Before long, the flowers became the center of one of history's most famous financial crazes. Some rare tulip bulbs were reportedly worth as much as a comfortable house. Merchants, craftsmen, and investors all hoped to profit as prices continued to climb. But the excitement did not last forever. In 1637, confidence suddenly disappeared. Buyers stopped purchasing bulbs. Prices collapsed almost overnight. Many people who had hoped to become wealthy were left with tulips worth only a fraction of what they had paid. Today, Tulip Mania is remembered as one of the world's earliest speculative bubbles, a remarkable reminder that sometimes the greatest value exists only as long as people believe it does. Our final story takes us to a quiet English village during the 12th century. One day, villagers working in the fields near Woolpit discovered two frightened children wandering alone. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. But there was one remarkable difference. Their skin was green. The children spoke a language no one could understand. Their strange clothing was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. Although they were offered bread, meat, and other foods, they refused to eat. For days, they survived only after discovering fresh beans growing in a nearby garden. Eventually, the young girl learned to speak English. She claimed that she and her brother had come from a mysterious place called St. Martin's Land. According to her, everyone there had green skin, and the sun never shone as brightly as it did in England. Over time, the girl's skin gradually lost its unusual color. Her brother, however, became ill and did not survive. To this day, historians continue to debate what really happened. Some believe the children suffered from a rare medical condition. Others suggest they were refugees from another community. Whatever the truth may be, the green children of Woolpit continue to remind us that the past still holds stories we may never fully explain. And so, our journey through these 25 bizarre stories from history comes to an end. Tonight, we've wandered through forgotten kingdoms, mysterious villages, unlikely emperors, remarkable discoveries, curious animals and events that seem almost impossible to believe. Each story is a reminder that history is far more than dates and names. It is filled with strange coincidences, remarkable people, and mysteries that continue to puzzle us centuries later. Perhaps somewhere, hidden within old libraries, weathered journals, or forgotten ruins, there are countless more stories still waiting to be discovered. But those can wait for another night. For now, let your thoughts drift gently into the quiet. Allow the stories to fade like distant echoes from another time. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If you enjoyed these stories, there are many more waiting for you here on the channel whenever you're ready to explore again. Until next time, sleep well.